Friday, if we recall, we discussed the Decalogue, right? Which is another way of referring to the Ten Commandments. The 10 words. Right? And we talked about them as outlining proper worship, and proper community. Right? What does worship of this particular God look like? And what does the community have to look like if it is to properly worship this God? Now, when we looked at this, we noticed that prior to these 10 commands being given, right, it takes a very particular form that we've seen pop up over and over again as we look throughout the Old Testament, and that was what? The form of a what? Covenant, good. Right. And a covenant based on what kind of treaty? Good. Covenant. Based on suzerainty treaty. Right? And it's good that you guys have noticed that this is a covenant, right? Because when we looked at it, we just kind of noticed that, hey, this looks like a suzerainty treaty. But as we've noticed, when the biblical text makes use of these treaties, it's in order to indicate that a covenant is being made, right? And so what we have here with the Decalogue, right, with these 10 commandments, and what follows is a covenant, right? Which brings us pretty much to our third covenant, right, that we've looked at so far. Our first one was with who?
Moses. I'm sorry.
Good. Noah, right? And so if we were to say this is the covenant of Noah, we could say this is the Noahic covenant. Right? And what did we see with the Noahic covenant? What was unique about it?
That it wasn't only for him, it was for
Good. Right. This is a universal covenant. It is both with Noah and his family, but also for all creation. Bingo. Who gets the second covenant? Where does the second covenant come in? Bingo. We can call this the Abrahamic covenant. What's unique with the Abrahamic covenant? Okay, it's just with the people of Israel. Good. It takes the shape of a royal land grant.
the circumcision.
Yeah, and the circumcision. And the circumcision is how it gets marked out that it's just with Abraham's family. Right? It's just with Abraham's family, just with his kin and his household, so including like the slaves of his household as well. And the circumcision is a sign of that. Right? That's the sign of the covenant, right? That's what marks out that covenant. And finally, we get the covenant with Moses, called the Mosaic covenant. Okay. And what we see that's unique with the Mosaic covenant is just this, right? This, we could say it's a relationship defined by Torah. And Torah is the Hebrew word for law. But it's so much more than that, and we'll kind of get into this as we start looking at these laws, that if we just equate Torah with law, right, then we think of it just as a legal code, right? We think of the Torah as a big series, as a big list of do's and do nots. But Torah means so much more than this. Torah is outlining what this relationship looks like, right? So we can also think of it as outlining a relationship, right? What does it mean to properly worship Yahweh? What does it mean for the people of Israel to be a community that can do that? Okay? So this also includes things like customs. Right? What are holy days? Right? What's customary dress, customary head coverings, customary food? Right? So laws, customs, this whole relationship is kind of outlined with this Torah. And this is what the Mosaic covenant does. And you notice in the Abrahamic and the Noahic covenant, we don't really get that. Right? We don't get really outlining what this relationship should look like. Right? God promises it to Abraham, but doesn't really require too much of him other than faithful obedience, right? It's with Moses and with the Decalogue and the laws that come after that we really start getting outlined what that relationship is going to look like. And that's what we want to dig into today.
Man.
What's that?
Man, a relationship with man. It's like an MAN from the...
Oh, it is, kind of, yes. It's convenient. So yeah, if you want a nice little mnemonic, you can remember that those are the three, right? Good. And it's interesting too. I mean, like this is a very key thing because we see through the covenants with Noah, Abraham, and Moses that this is how God is working His relationship with Israel. Israel's relationship to God, to Yahweh, is defined through covenant. Right? That's what outlines their relationship, what defines their relationship with their God. So we're going to dig into these laws, right, into this Torah. But in order to do that, just as in the same way that when we dug into the creation myths and when we dug into the flood myths, we looked at other ancient Near Eastern stories, other ancient Near Eastern parallels to get a good feel for what's going on in the biblical text. So we're going to do that, and that's why I had you guys look at the Code of Hammurabi. So go ahead and take out your 10, I think everybody had about 10 codes, or 10 laws to look at. Now, when we're looking at this, there's don't get confused. I think, if you look it up online and compare it to your book, there's a couple ways to spell it. See if it's E, or P, and this is sometimes a B. Right, so the Law Code of Hammurabi, Law Code of Hammurabi, is the same thing. Oops, that's a U, I'm sorry. Okay. Now this is a ancient law code from a Babylonian king from about the 18th century BCE. Okay. So we can say here, 18th century BCE Babylonian law code. And if you noticed, I don't know if you all looked at any more laws than what you had, but there's about 300 of them. Yes. Right? It's incredibly extensive, which is great for biblical scholars and ancient Near Eastern scholars to have this much insight into the kind of social workings of the ancient Near East. So I want us to kind of talk about what these law codes look like. What did you guys notice? How would you describe some of the laws you looked at? Consequences. What do you mean?
I mean, if they didn't do something, they had to, won't be punished, but.
Okay.
I don't know how to say it.
No, it's okay.
The one,
Okay, yeah. There's some really harsh laws. Yeah, so there's a lot of consequences. If you notice, as I'm sure you did, if you scroll through, almost all of them were if such, then such. Now Safa here was saying a lot of the thens seem to be death.
yeah.
Or there's some very harsh punishments here.
The ones I looked at, it was like you go through trial and then you get sentenced, which is the same thing as like death on most of them.
Okay, yeah. So there's
There was a lot of you had to prove stuff.
So there's this kind of outlining of some kind of like judicial system, like how courts work.
They were very
Does that tie in
detailed.
with them having to pay something or do a duty?
Right, that's
Okay.
more of these consequences, right? So it can be death. You can, there's some kind of like, we'll just keep it. Say duty, you have to do something. Sometimes like payment, restitution has to be paid. Good. What else?
They were very detailed. They covered everything.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. Do you think, like, let's think about these, how detailed some of these were. When you're looking through these codes, and each of these particular, instances, does it cover everything?
Well, my section did. It was like, good Lord, how many different ways can you
Seems like,
give a
just
guy?
by reading it, it kind of makes me think that they made the laws kind of as they went. Like something happened, they're like, all right, we'll take care of this right now. If a mayor marries a woman, then
Yeah.
just like as
Because they covered
history
so
was
many
unfolding, they
things.
were like, make it kind of as they were going along. It doesn't seem like they
Sat down
Set-
and all,
yeah.
all the different scenarios like that.
Right.
just
And that's a
covered-
really good observation to make, because in a sense, even though we do have some kind of hints at what it would look like, what their kind of judicial system would look like with like going to court and defending yourself, what they are not doing in this law code is setting out a system, right? This doesn't make a system to cover everything, right? What it's doing is like kind of like you're saying, is it's just giving very specific instances. They're not saying this isn't like some kind of political theory put out by like Adam Smith or Hamilton or anything like that. They're not forming a system with these law codes, right? They're more saying like, here are particular instances, and here's how they're going to be dealt with. You want to add on to that?
Oh, no.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
if I may, if it's the first time that was actually established as a laws for a community, it's a civil law,
Mhm.
isn't it from its perspective system?
Say that one more time for me.
If it's a first ever civil law
Mm-hmm.
established and put on a stone,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it kind of like a system for that community?
Not necessarily. Well, one, because we don't know if this is the first, right? There may have been laws or groups of laws before this. And this is why it's good to look back at these things and see how different people thought in different stages in history, because what the Law Code of Hammurabi is doing is not trying to put forth a system, right? The Law Code of Hammurabi is actually, in a sense, more concerned with Hammurabi
Yes.
than it is with setting out some kind of definitive system. Do you notice when you read the preface, or the prologue and the epilogue?
Yes. Oh my goodness.
What was interesting about that prologue and epilogue?
He was wonderful. I mean, oh my goodness. There was nothing.
Hammurabi
great.
is a pretty amazing guy.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had you read the prologue and the epilogue, and I wanted you to kind of get the sense of that. There's a lot of that we're not going to go over, just because it just goes on and on about what Hammurabi is doing and how great he is. But I do want us to look at some specific things in that. If you have it with you, it's great. If you don't, it's all right too. But notice that he says things like this. Then Anu and Bel, these are two gods, called by name me, Hammurabi, the exalted prince who feared God to bring about the rule of righteousness in the land. Right? Hammurabi has been called by the gods to institute these law codes. Right? He's been given this task by divine authority. Right? Hammurabi has divine authority to enforce and make these laws, or to make and enforce them, right? He is not even just some schmuck that has been given this. But notice he says, Hammurabi the prince called of Bel am I, right? So even just him being a king is some kind of divine appointment. And in the epilogue, just a couple sentences here, it says, I have not withdrawn myself from men who Bel gave to me the rule over whom Marduk gave to me. So again, this idea that his kingship is given by the gods. The great gods have called me. I'm the salvation-bearing shepherd. Right? That the strong might not injure the weak, in order to protect the widows and the orphans. He says later, to set up all my precious words written upon my memorial stone before the image of me as King of righteousness. Now, this is interesting because what we see with the Code of Hammurabi is that it is written upon, this big stone, right? And it has all these law codes laid out. So let's think about this. I'm a king. I have this divine right to rule and a divine right to make these laws, right? And I've written these laws upon stones, right? So wherever I go to conquer, whatever land I take over from my kingdom, I'm going to set in its place one of these stones. And when I do that, I'm claiming that I'm the rightful ruler of this place, right? That I have divine right to be your king, and I have divine right to tell you what to do. So these laws, in a sense, are kind of a justification of royal authority. Right? And that's why they're not so much concerned with setting out a system, because they're concerned with a justification of royal authority. This is what these laws are doing. Even later, I mean, just kind of going along with that. Hammurabi, the king of righteousness, on whom Shamash has conferred right of law am I. Right. Let him not alter the law of the land which I have given. Right. This is Hammurabi's law. Nobody can alter this. Right. So this is why these laws aren't comprehensive. Right? And we do kind of get this sense, like you said, that like as things come up, they add this to the law. Hammurabi says, like, no, this is what's going to go. For sure. Let's see here. Now, let's talk about these if-thens. Do any of these if-thens or any of the laws you looked at seem extreme?
No.
We get some nods. Do any of them seem to fit?
That seemed
Well, let's hear an example of some that seem to fit. You got one?
Yeah, this is my favorite one. 168. If a man wished to put his son out of his house, declare before the judge, I want to put my son out. Then this judge shall examine into his reasons. If the son be guilty of no great fault for which he can be rightfully put out, the father shall not put him out.
Makes sense. So the judge says, is there one that fall is 169? Did you have 169?
Yeah.
What fault is that? Another one kind of relating to that?
If you be guilty of a grave fault which should rightfully deprive him of the filial relationship, the father shall forgive him the first time. But if he be guilty of a grave fault a second time, the father may deprive his son of all filial relation.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's like saying so this is going to come to court, right? A father can't just say, no, I want my son out and kick him out, or he's got to take him to court. I'd be interested to see if he brings false accusations and like if it addresses that 170 or 171 if somebody has that.
I got 170.
Because there's sometimes when if you bring a false accusation, then you then suffer the penalty of what the person you were accusing would have suffered. All right, what's another? Is there anybody else have one that seems to fit?
The first one.
What's that?
That what you're talking about happens in number 1.
Okay, you have that?
I had later on, but I started. There's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them. Yeah, what's number 1?
Let me go through.
I have it. Yeah.
There are
It
300.
says something, if anyone ensnare another, putting a ban upon him, but he cannot prove it, then he that ensnared him should be
Gotcha. So if you bring false accusations, then you're going to suffer consequences yourself. Good. This idea of trying to have a punishment fit the crime has a very specific name, and it's called lex talionis. Lex talionis is what that gets referred to as. This is when the punishment fits the crime, right? The common biblical way of that where we see lex talionis is this idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, while some of these punishments may seem extreme, the idea of lex talionis is in order to keep punishments from being too extreme. This is the purpose of what lex talionis is trying to do. This idea that we need to have the punishment fit the crime is not so that the punishments can be really awful, but it's that so that we keep people from going overboard when it comes to punishment. Right? That the king or whoever is judging this certain scenario can't just do whatever the king wants because he doesn't like the person, or the judge can decree that, oh, you stepped on this guy's foot, therefore you must be put to death. Right? This idea is trying to keep that in balance. And we see that a little more in the biblical text, even though there are some biblical texts that seem to go well beyond this and saying things like, if a child disrespects his parents, that child can be put to death. And you're like, okay, that might be stepping a little bit beyond this.
I don't think so.
Do you have something?
Yeah, mine is kind of crazy.
Okay. What kind of things have you got?
Because it's like two of them that I'm really questionable about. And that's 128 and 130. 128 says, if a man take a woman to wife, but have no intercourse with her, this woman is no wife to him.
What's the other one say?
And then the other one says, if a man's wife be surprised in fragrant delicto, I don't know how to pronounce it.
What number is it?
It's 129.
If a man's wife be surprised, it's using Latin. With another man, so she's sleeping with another man, like, and you walk in on that. Both shall be tied and thrown into the water. But the husband may pardon his wife, and the king his slaves. So the king can pardon the slaves if they're sleeping with some of the slave girls, and the slave girls are obviously for the king. Right, so yeah.
What is a child wife? What does that mean?
Child wife.
Yeah, because it has it in text here on 130. If a man violate the wife, brother, or child wife of another man who has never known a man and still lives in her father's house and sleep with her and be surprised, this man should be put to death, but the wife is blameless.
It's betrothed. It's someone promised to someone.
Child wife,
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so she's betrothed to.
but she don't know to be somebody's wife.
No. She's been promised
That's like.
when she's of age.
Like putting something on layaway.
Oh,
Yeah, pretty much.
When you get it, it's yours.
Yeah.
I'm right there, Trey.
Come on,
Right.
I've been home, but I ain't been at home.
So here's what we see, and I'm sure some of you guys were kind of feeling this, is when you read these laws, and even when we read the biblical law codes, what we have is a window into an ancient culture and how an ancient society operates and how it thinks. And part of that includes laws that say it's okay to have slaves and here's how you treat your slaves. And they say, oh, a woman is also your property. And the purpose of a woman is to bear you children. And if that woman does not bear you children, she's not really a wife. So you can have another, right? You can cast her away because she is not fulfilling her purpose of bearing you children. Right? But this is how ancient cultures operated and how they viewed the world. Right? And so when we read these biblical law codes, we have to realize that we can't just take these law codes out of their ancient cultures and just like feel like we can plop them in today and they should all make sense. Right? We have a window into how ancient cultures thought and operated when we see these law codes, and some of them such as saying like, well, if you can't bear children, then you're no wife, right? So when we look at these law codes and we start looking at the biblical law codes, we need to keep in mind that they're coming out of this same kind of worldview that, or a very similar worldview that these Babylonian law codes are coming out of, right? Another thing we see is that it's kind of similar between these two, from the biblical text and the law code of Hammurabi, is that it's set in a religious context, right? Both these law codes are set in a religious context. The difference is that with the law code of Hammurabi, what we see is Hammurabi saying, I have been given divine right to give you these laws, to make laws and to enforce them. What we see with the Decalogue and with the laws that follow that is Moses saying, I'm delivering these laws straight from Yahweh. I had no part in this. God just spoke these laws to me, and I'm just giving them to you. Right? So in a sense, Hammurabi is, and you can kind of tell this from that introduction that's exceedingly long, and where Hammurabi is saying how great he is Hammurabi is, in a sense, deifying himself, making himself a god, right? Putting himself in that place. And that's fine for ancient Near Eastern religions, right? To see the ruler as having this kind of divine authority. What's interesting is when we look at the Hebrew text, we see a shift away from that, right? A shift to saying there is but one God, and any person is just a conduit of that God. It's just a messenger, or is just one who hears and then relates that to the rest of humanity, right? It is not because Moses is in a sense special or divine in any way that he can give these laws, right? Because the laws are straight from God. And what we finally see between similarities between these two is this linking of the secular and sacred. Right. This is why in the law code of Hammurabi, he can go straight from saying, you know, I am the divinely appointed ruler and the divinely appointed lawgiver, into saying things about how people should handle their daily lives. Right? Because this idea that, okay, over here are religious things and over here are secular things, that division doesn't exist in the ancient world. Right? And we see that in the law code of Hammurabi, and we see it very clearly in the law code that we're looking at, the biblical law codes. So let's take a look real quick at the covenant code. And the covenant code is what immediately follows the Decalogue. So we move straight from these 10 commandments in the biblical text to what is called the covenant code. And this is what you would have read about in chapter 10. And this is what the Code of Hammurabi is going to help us kind of see even more clearly. Now, the Covenant Code is made up of two different kinds of laws. Okay? And the one you already know because you've worked with the law code of Hammurabi. And it's this if-then sequence. Right? If you look in Exodus, 20 through 23, you'll see this a lot. You'll see this if-then formula a lot. And what that's called is causistic law. Think of it as cause and effect, right? Which I think somebody was like a phrase somebody said earlier, right? This cause and effect, right? If you do this, then this thing will happen, right? This is called causistic law. If anybody has a biblical text with them, it'd be interesting to see if you can just look through Exodus 20 through 23 and just give us a good example of that in the biblical text.
You said calling it
Yeah, there's an if-then formula to it. If this happens, and sometimes it's rare that the biblical text will say then, but it will say if such and such happens, blah, 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 but you can kind of infer the then. Yeah, you got one?
Oh, good.
I don't know if it's, okay.
Give it a shot.
21.
Mhm.
The second, when you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, but in the seventh he shall go out a free person without debt.
Okay, hold on to that one, 'cause that's gonna be our other kind.
I have 21:7
Uh-huh.
that says, I'm sorry, 8, well, 7 and 8. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the master's slaves do. If she does not please her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed.
Good.
21:17.
What was that one say?
Whoever curses father or mother shall be put to death.
That's gonna be our other one, because there's no if, there's no if there.
There's no if?
Oh,
Yeah, there's no, whoever, it's just saying, whoever does this, this is the
7 and
consequence.
8.
Okay, 21:3 and 4 is if
Alright, Kaya has one, Go for it.
21:3 says, if he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him.
Good.
That's it.
Right? Look for that if then. Jay.
Anybody read this, 20, verse 2? It said, if a thief is found breaking in and it is, pierced to death, no blood guilt is,
Yeah, no blood guilt upon him. Good. So yeah, that if then. If this is the case, then this. Right? Now some of you were kind of referencing some others that seem to have, they're all going to have this kind of two, or they typically have this two-part kind of section. And the ones a lot of you were referencing were just saying, this kind of person, or this situation, this is this is what follows. So what is the one you read again?
That was 21:17.
Read that again for me.
Whoever curses father or mother shall be put to death.
Right.
So that's-
Whoever does this, this is the consequence. That kind of law is apodictic.
How do you say that again?
Apodictic. These are general laws, right? There's some that say whoever kills will be killed, right? Whoever curses his father and mother will be killed, right? Whoever does this, this is the situation.
So here's another
If you steal a man's donkey in the night and the fence is open, you know, like, you get some of these that just go into, like, really, really specific nitpicky things.
So both of them are the if law.
No, the causistic is the if one.
Okay.
Yeah, the causistic, this is if. You can kind of think of if, then, and in a sense we can think of apodictic as kind of a whoever.
Oh,
Okay, so I understand, but it's confusing me a little bit.
Okay.
Because in 21:12 it says, whoever strikes a person mortally shall be put to death. But then immediately following it says, if it was not premeditated but came about by an act of God, then I will appoint for you a place to which the killer may flee.
Right.
So
So we
it's
have
a
this,
little
we
bit
have
of
this
both.
apodictic law that starts.
First,
Whoever
okay,
does this,
okay.
this is the situation. But if there's the special case, we've got this special kind of law that's going to follow.
So
So
that
it
kind
could
of
be
shows you
one in-
both of them right there together.
Yeah, you can have this kind of broad apodictic law, and then a causistic law that will follow it that says, like, but if there's this kind of case.
21,
Yeah.
12, and 13.
Yeah, so you guys, if you, what's that reference?
21, 12 through 13.
21, 12 through 13. That's a good example of something that starts with an apodictic law and then follows with the causistic law. Yeah.
I got one in here, but it don't say if then, but it does have then in it.
Okay, give us that.
And it's 23:22. It says, but if you listen attentively to his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes.
All right, what's the second word in that one?
Yeah.
Then,
No, the second word in that verse that you read.
if,
If. But if, blah, 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 then, blah, blah, blah.
so it would, if
Right.
it stays.
That's a little bit more of a blessing formula. Like, if you are my people, then I will be your God, kind of thing.
So it would have to say if then together, like if has to be first and then is after.
Well, that's how they're usually going to appear. If this is the case, right? You think about these. Think about the causistic ones as the kind of nitpicky. Like, we need to add a little detail here, right? If somebody kills you, then they should be put to death, right? But if it was in the middle of the night and they couldn't see you and they thought you were a murderer, then they can run to a safe city and should stay there and not be put to death. Right? So if there's this kind of like very particular situation, then we might need to have this other kind of law pick up. Yeah. Did you have a question?
No, 2135 is it's a cost.
Okay. You want to read that for us?
If someone's ox hurts the ox of another, so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the price of it, and the dead ox animal shall be also divided.
Good. You see how like specific that is?
That's how my law goes.
Right? These causistic laws are going to be that kind of very specific situational kind of things. You can think of causistic as situational. Right? If this very specific situation happens, then here's the thing. The apodictic is just like, look, if you kill somebody, you should be put to death. We might have to have some causistic situational stuff, but generally here's the law for that. Okay?
Isn't that kind of like our law? If you kill someone, you get the death penalty. However, if it was manslaughter or self-defense
Yeah.
or...
Yeah, so these are just kind of two general categories of law, for sure. Now, what we see in this covenant code is a lot of things that we saw in the Law Code of Hammurabi. For example, the Hebrew people are not trying in the covenant code or anywhere between Exodus and Deuteronomy to set forth some kind of judicial system. Right? They are not putting out a system and saying, here is how justice works. Right? They're giving you very specific kind of laws, and some very general ones too. Right? But this isn't for the purpose of saying, here's how a judicial system should work, here's how a system of justice should operate. They are, in a sense, doing kind of what the Law Code of Hammurabi did, is affirming Yahweh's sovereignty. Right? That is what this covenant code is doing, is affirming Yahweh's sovereignty. And what's a little different, though, with this, is that instead of this covenant code being tied to, or this system being tied to a ruler and his land, you have this being tied to a people. Right? So the Law Code of Hammurabi puts these big stones wherever he's taken over, and that's that law for that land, right? It designates where his space is, where he's king. The covenant code, because it's a covenant code, is attached to the people of Israel. This is not a law for all of humanity, right? The Decalogue, these 10 commandments, everything that follows, is not something that all of humanity is supposed to follow. This is a law code for the covenant people. This is given, the text says repeatedly, to the people of Israel. Right? This is given to them and for them. This is not something that God is saying, hey, Israelites, tell the world this is how you're supposed to operate. He's saying this is how you operate if you're to be my people, if you're to be my covenant people. This is the kind of community that you have to be. Good. Now, we've got another few minutes. Yeah, why not? Let's see here. If I can wake this thing back up. Don't back up yet. What the text, whoops, I'm not that person. What the text then goes into, oh, I need to do this differently. Switch user, there we are. Maybe. Sorry, it's very difficult to speak and do this at the same time. Kind of in this idea of, remember we talked about that we can't really separate out religion from, or what's sacred from what's secular. Right after this covenant code, where we start getting these very particular things about this is how, you deal with oxes and slaves and your women and all this kind of stuff. Right after that, the text goes into talking about what the tabernacle should look like and what the holy place should look like. And it goes into incredible detail and repetitive detail about what that should look like. Because the text, and I guess trying to make sure we get the point, says, here's how you should build it. And then we get like 3 chapters of that, and then we get 3 chapters of it saying, and here's how they get it. And they match, right? So kind of driving home that point that Israel is a faithful people. And oh no, it has been taken away. Well, let me see. Well, yeah, it's kind of important that we see this. I don't know why it closed everything out on us. Well, we can maybe watch the video another time. It's a shame. But here is kind of our typical image of the Ark of the Covenant, right? The video was from the Raiders of the Lost Ark, that Indiana Jones movie, right? And you get them, and they're carrying something that looks very similar to this, right? And they open it up, and all of the Nazis' faces melt off.
Yes.
Right? There's a couple ways that Steven Spielberg is trying to stay faithful to the text, and there's a couple ways where he's just kind of doing his own movie thing. The first thing, and this is kind of a point of debate among scholars, is in Exodus, let me get my references right, 25, it describes the building of the covenant, the building of the Ark of the Covenant, right? And into this, Moses is to lay the tablets of the law, right? And there's a couple other things that get added later on. But this is supposed to hold the covenant, right? The text then is a little unclear about this cover, because in, 10 through 16, it talks about the ark. And then in 17 through 22, it talks about an ark cover. But that's a really fuzzy translation, because the translators aren't really sure how to translate what this thing is, right? What this ark cover is. And just to kind of give you some context, how the text describes this ark cover is that there is supposed to be this kind of slab with two cherubim on it, right? And this slab is supposed to be the footstool, and God is supposed to sit between or on the cherubim, okay? This doesn't look like a comfortable thing to sit on. What the text may actually be getting at is something more like this. And this is a depiction of King Ahirab. And if you notice, here we have something that his feet are on, a footstool. And here we have two cherubim. Right? And here's our king right here. Okay. This may be more what the text is getting at. That Yahweh, they are to create this space upon which their king, right, their rightful king, Yahweh, is to sit. Right? This may be the reference from which the Hebrew people are kind of pulling as they're thinking through how to create this temple and this movable portable temple for Yahweh. Right? Creating these two cherubim between which and on which Yahweh is to sit as a throne, and creating this footstool for Yahweh. Now the ark itself, if we had a few more minutes, in 1 Samuel 4, 2 through 7, and in Numbers 10, 33 through 36, the way it talks about the ark is as this palladium, for lack of a easier word. A palladium is...
What book did you say, what chapter you said,
It's in Exodus 20.
that tells us how to build it?
How to build it, yes ma'am. 25, I'm sorry. A palladium is an object that is believed to bring safety, right? You carry this with you. It is supposed to ensure your safety and well-being. And the way that the ark does this is, in a sense, it carries the presence of God, right? For the people of Israel, they believe that in carrying this ark, which carried in it the tablets of the commandments, that therefore somehow bore the presence of Yahweh. So in 1 Samuel, you have the people, I think it's in 1 Samuel, you have the people going with it into battle. I think in Numbers is the one where you have the people just carrying it from place to place And at each place that they went, the presence of God would follow the ark and would settle there when the people stopped. Right? And then and then the presence would go up when they went to move, and then it wouldn't come back down until they stopped and put the ark down where they were to stay the night. Right? So the ark is this thing that carries the presence of the Lord with them. Right? And it's very important because what we see with Moses, remember from Moses for some 40 years, right, the biblical text says, we have the people of Israel moving around. Right? And that's why the people need a tabernacle. Right? This is another way of referring to it is the tent of the meeting. And we have very specific instructions in the book of Exodus on how to build this thing. Right? And it needs to be a tent because the people of Israel, right, are moving. They are nomadic. Right? They are moving through the wilderness. So we need to carry with us a temple, in a sense. This is a mobile temple. Because it is in that mobile temple that they are to meet Yahweh, right? Or that the priests are to interact with Yahweh.